Hello and welcome to What the Luxe with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services.
Edwin Brenninkmeyer approaches aviation with passion and intent. A commercial and private pilot with over 2 decades of aircraft ownership, he understands what many don't, that in high-stakes categories, value lies in detail, sequencing, service, and the systems that sit behind the product. He founded Oriens Aviation in 2015 to bring that mindset to aircraft ownership. Today, the business spans sales, charter, management, pilot training, and maintenance, operating as an authorised centre for Pilatus and Tecnam and Cirrus, and we'll get onto that later. Oriens isn't about theatre, it's about craft, operational integrity, and supporting owners well beyond their point of sale. With an MBA from Oxford focused on business aviation and airport models, and a background in retail consulting and venture capital, he sits at the intersection of business model design, service psychology, and high-performance product. Edwin, welcome to What the Luxe.
Thank you so much, Fred. A real pleasure to be here.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. As I've said before on this podcast, I come from a family of propeller heads and aviation enthusiasts, so it's a delight for me to get onto this subject. I think, firstly, for our audience, we're going to have to explain what is a Pilatus, a Tecnam, and a Cirrus, because not many are going to know.
So a Pilatus is, well, there are two products principally within the Pilatus produce. So one is called the PC-12, which was originally designed for the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Australia. So they actually approached Pilatus and said, we would like you to build us an aeroplane that suits our purpose. So it can land on very rough, unprepared strips in the middle of the outback in Australia.
Got you.
Has a lot of lighting, so it can light up those strips if they land in the dark. Has a big cargo door, so you can get a stretcher in the back. You can drive a vehicle, an ambulance, unimpeded up to the cargo door and lift a stretcher in. And people love that aeroplane, and then they said, we wish it could go a bit faster. And then they built the PC-24, which is a jet version. So the PC-12 has a turboprop, which is essentially a jet engine, a turbine spinning a propeller. And the jet is what most people think of as a jet, which is, again, a turbine engine spinning a fan enclosed in a casing, but it's the same engine, basically.
Yeah. So these are obviously aeroplanes, but when we're talking about your business, which would be great to hear what you do from your, as you describe it, but we're not talking about what some people might go to when we think of private aviation, of sort of Learjets and, those big Gulfstreams. We're talking about something different, aren't we, the area you operate in?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we span everything from the smallest aircraft that we sell is the light end of the Tecnam fleet, which is really a training aircraft. So it's a 2-seat aeroplane with a very small engine that's perfect for flying schools. So we tend to sell those in bulk to corporate customers, flight schools, right through to your first personal aircraft, which could be a propeller, and then onto the Pilatus PC-12, and then the PC-24. And those aircraft are used for a lot of the time for business. We do medevac flights in them, for example. So we actually have our own aircraft that has a stretcher in the back, so we can do that kind of operation as well.
Yep.
I really regard them as a productivity tool, although people do use them for leisure, of course, as well. So it's both markets.
Okay, so and when you say productivity tool, what you're talking about is facilitating business, really.
Absolutely.
Mean, there's the medevac use as well, and those sort of areas. But it's business, essentially, isn't it?
It is business. So I think, again, there's a big misunderstanding of business aviation, as the name implies, in Europe. Yeah. But in the US, for example, 50% of people that fly on a business jet in the US, which is the majority, are middle management. They're not top management.
So we're not talking kind of Steve Jobs.
They do fly on business aviation aircraft as well. Of course they do.
Sure. But most people are not that, or not Kanye West in the airport type thing.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So Warren Buffett, famously, I think he was very dismissive of business aviation in the early days and called it the indefensible. Yeah. And then he called it the indispensable when he realized just how invaluable a productivity tool, his aircraft was.
Yeah.
It just opens up so many more possibilities. You can do multi-trip day trips, for a business that has multiple locations, factories, that kind of thing. You just can't do that by airline. You're going through a hub a lot of the time, or driving to your final destination because it's that much further to drive away from the main airport. Then you're staying overnight in a hotel. Whereas flying on a business aviation aircraft, you can fly directly to where you want to go, to an airfield that's much closer to where you want to actually get to.
Yep.
And you can get home at night, so you don't have to, because you go on your own schedule. So you're not restricted to an airline schedule and flying through a hub. And of course, that gives employees their time back. And it's a productivity tool. So it's good for business. It's also good for employees, for their families.
Yeah.
They get to spend more time with their family. They come home at night, and it's just a win-win all round.
And so you started this business in 2015.
I did.
You obviously spotted a gap in the market, and your background was retail, I think. What did you spot? How did you start the business?
That's a long story. I was always obviously very passionate about aviation. I think my passion really, obviously I'm a pilot, so I love flying, but when I had my own aircraft, I was just able to use it so much more productively because I was in retail, as you rightly say.
Mhm.
And so at the time I was living in Vienna and I was going to the Czech Republic.
Yep.
And the European Executive Board would come from Brussels or Düsseldorf. We'd have meetings in Vienna, and then we'd go to Prague because that was the only place you could get to by airline. And we look at the Czech stores, and then they go off back to Brussels and Düsseldorf, and they wouldn't have a clue about the Czech Republic. They would think that Prague is the Czech Republic.
Which is a bit like saying London is not like the north of England.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and having my own aircraft, I was able to visit all these stores. I was able to go to Brno and Ostrava and Olomouc and all these places and actually fly directly to the small airport. And it just opened up a whole new world and a whole new opportunity. So I think it was the convenience of business aviation that attracted me to the industry as well as my passion for it. And then, so I was actually in venture capital. So I spotted an opportunity in the mid-2000s where there's something called a very light jet. So there were some very smart people in the tech business. So Vern Rayburn, for example, and he was one of Bill Gates's very early colleagues in Microsoft. And he was a pilot, and he said, well, there's a confluence of technologies coming together. So manufacturing technique, friction stir welding, the power plant technology was becoming more cost effective and also more efficient, so cheaper. And also the avionics, so the instrumentation on the airplane. So the confluence of these three things, he thought he could build a jet for $1 million.
Yeah.
And he's probably right. He did underestimate the regulator to some extent, but I explored that business through venture capital. So that was my first kind of insight into entrepreneurship and the whole value chain around aviation. And there wasn't really enough deal flow in venture capital to continue investing in aviation in venture capital. So that was really the choice that I had, is either I continue in traditional VC investments or continue with my own aviation business. And I chose the latter. And that's where I set up the consultancy to advise a lot of these companies how to write a business plan, how to pitch for funding, how to work with venture capital. That was my platform to spot opportunities in the industry to set up my own business. And then I went from there to the Pilatus opportunity. And that was actually an existing dealer who was retiring.
I see.
And long story short, I had to start it from scratch. So I didn't acquire his business, but I started it from scratch.
Okay. And that's the business of, you're essentially a dealer for the manufacturer.
Correct.
And you buy the planes off your own balance sheet?
We do,
It's
yes.
quite risky, I imagine.
It is. So that's why the residual values for our aircraft are very strong, because if you're not purchasing the aircraft yourself as what's called a stocking dealer, there's little risk. So because there's risk, we really know our market very well. The reward is also very high. So the reward is extremely high, but there's an expectation to provide a commensurate level of service, to go with that reward. So for that reason, there's a risk and there's also a reward. So we know our market. We know how many airplanes we're going to sell the following year. That then informs the OEM's production of those aircraft.
Yeah.
So they don't overproduce airplanes, only to have to discount them when they can't be sold. And so discounting airplanes actually does, it just dilutes the value proposition of the aircraft and it destroys the brand.
Yeah. And you are you're a big business actually, or a big medium-sized business. You're not,
I wouldn't say big.
You're playing in a niche of sorts, and you would say no to certain customers. Can you just describe why you would say no to a customer to an airplane?
I mean, two reasons. I think the first question always has to be, why do you want to buy an airplane? What's your mission profile? What do you want to use it for? And then we try to, so that's the first question, is obviously we want to match the right airplane to the right customer. And the second reason is, I believe very strongly in long-term value creation and doing business with integrity. And if we get the wrong customer into the wrong airplane, then it's not good for long-term business for us. It just destroys our brand. It destroys the Oriens brand. We want to build a trusting relationship with the customer. So if the airplane isn't right for the customer, we'll tell them it's not right for them, and we won't sell them that particular aircraft.
Yeah.
And then hopefully, if they end up buying the right airplane, and we'll advise them which is the right airplane, they'll come back after a few years and they say, you know what, I trust you, because you weren't just trying to sell me anything. You're trying to, put me in the right aircraft. And if you didn't have the right aircraft, it just builds that trust with the customer, and that creates long-term value.
Yeah.
But the aircraft, I mean, look, if you want to fly, let's say you fly regularly from Biggin Hill to Naples or to Athens, and you need to be near a large airport, then you might as well get a jet. And if you're flying with lots of people, I mean, Pilatus do have a jet, but you might need a larger jet, let's say, than the Pilatus jet. But if you're regularly going to somewhere where there's a small grass runway, then our airplane's ideally suited.
Yeah.
And our jet can also get into that runway as well. So, or if you're carrying a large cargo, and you need the cargo door, that's where our aircraft is absolutely perfect for that mission as well.
And you described eloquently that essentially the luxury of business travel is flexibility. It's productive. You get home to your family, all of those kind of things. What's been the change, I guess, since the pandemic in people's use of planes for business purposes?
I think, again, it goes back to what I sort of hinted on before about the stigma of business aviation, especially in Europe, less so in the US, but especially in Europe. And McKinsey did a study pre-COVID that showed that 95% of people who could afford to fly privately chose not to fly privately.
Yeah.
And that's simply because they just didn't agree with the principle of business aviation. They thought it was excessive, for whatever reason. And COVID changed that. So those 95% of people who could afford to fly privately decided to fly privately because they wanted to buy security. They didn't want to, to go in a big aluminium tube with other people if they could afford it. And then I think they realize at that point there's a conversion process where the customer realizes what business aviation can actually do. And then they realize that it's an on-demand service. So you can go when you want to go. You're not dependent on an airline schedule. You have more flexibility of airports that you can fly from. You can fly in. You can be productive on the airplane, so you can actually fly with your management team and can have a productive meeting on the aircraft. Yeah. You can fly with your family and just enjoy the whole experience much more than if you go by airline. So all those benefits, then people realize that, and I think they stayed with business aviation. They got hooked.
Yeah, I think what must be surprising for all of us really is you will have eyes on the business that happens in Europe, intra-Europe, I guess. And since Brexit, you might think it's reduced, but there's just all sorts of people who need to be in all sorts of places at all times for very, very surprising reasons, big, small and medium challenges, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, I think especially, we've seen a lot of business within the UK as well. And I think that's also because of Brexit.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, we do also have what's called an AOC, an Air Operator Certificate, which is essentially an airline. So
right,
we're held to the same standards as British Airways. We have to write manuals, we have safety management system, we have compliance, we have all these different things. So it's essentially an airline. And with Brexit, we are now, there's a UK AOC. So the UK is separately regulated from Europe. So what that means is that we can fly to Europe, but then we have to fly back to the UK again. So we can no longer fly within Europe. But also, a European operator can no longer fly within the UK. So that's created a little bit of a vacuum where we previously had European operators that did operate within the UK, can no longer do so. And that's created a vacuum for us. And that's why we tend to do lots of flights within the UK.
Correct.
But also our aircraft are relatively short haul. They can fly long distances as well.
Yeah.
But the sweet spot really is short hops. And so we've also had customers who are not on our AOC, who buy airplanes because they have multiple locations within the UK, because the UK is our territory, so they tend to have multiple businesses and multiple bases. We have an Irish customer, for example, who's expanding to the UK now. We had an English retail customer that also needed to use the aircraft to get around sort of different sites and around the UK. So that's the kind of thing.
Amazing. We're quite obsessed on this podcast by the notions of loyalty in the luxury space. For you, what's loyalty in your industry? How do you get that to happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing, it starts with the OEM.
Yep.
So as I said before, I really believe in long-term value creation, and I think that's why I think we are also a good cultural fit with our OEM. So our biggest OEM is Pilatus. Tecnam share very much the same ethos, and Cirrus. So we're not actually selling Cirrus aircraft; we're a maintenance provider for Cirrus. Yep. But Pilatus being Swiss, they very much believe in creating long-term value and long-term business partnerships. That's where it starts. So I think the fact that we have quite a long contract with Pilatus really helps, because that way we can plan. Pilatus can plan, they can count on us. We give them full transparency so they can also see our financial figures. They also know that we're a strong, stable partner for them as well. So it goes both ways. And that just means that we can give customers, good service, and the customers, hopefully we build the, good relationship with our customers. And we are a one-stop shop. So the customer buys an aircraft from us. We take care of everything for the customer. So we can operate the aircraft when the customer isn't using it. It comes to us for maintenance. So, we always say the relationship with the customer starts once they bought the well, obviously it doesn't start, once they bought it, but it really starts once they've actually bought the aeroplane. It's that long-term relationship. And that takes time to build that trust. And we have to earn it. And I think, I don't think it's not that commonplace. I think other customers have experienced bad things in the industry as well, and we try to reassure them. I think transparency is key as well. A lot of aviation has 3-letter acronyms, that kind of thing, and it's very technical. And I think customers find that daunting. And I think to make it simple and to cut through all the jargon and all the acronyms and to tell the customer, well, how much am I really paying, and does that include everything, and what are the other costs, and just guiding the customer through that process to just give them better clarity and better visibility on what they're actually buying and what the service is and what their costs will really be. That's a big challenge, and that's how we earn their trust.
And I wonder why. I think for people zooming in on this industry, but also luxury automotive or luxury windows, there are always these, I suppose, in those industry dealers, these middlemen between the manufacturers and the customer. Why don't the manufacturers do it themselves?
Well, I can't speak for other manufacturers, but certainly the ones that we work with, they focus on building airplanes. That's what they do best. And if they're working hard to build airplanes, they can't be in, as I said before, that there's a lot of risk that we take on in actually purchasing the airplanes. So we have to know our market very well. And if you're an OEM, you can't really be, yes, you can employ people in the market, but they wouldn't necessarily have the same risk that we have as a business who actually has to buy the airplane. Somebody who's employed in a different part of the world isn't going to be buying airplanes. So, they're going to be employed to sell airplanes. They're going to be on a commission, whereas we take all the risk. So I think that's how, that's really the way it works. So
yeah. And just touching on private aviation in its entirety, it will of course attract criticism for various aspects. The obvious being, I suppose it might be termed inefficient in terms of, and a polluter, and things like that. What's your stance on that?
Inefficient, definitely not. So it depends how you use it. Again, if you can really use aviation as a productivity tool, because it gets you so much closer to your final destination, and it gets you there on your own schedule. So I think we spoke a lot about efficiency already. In terms of pollution, it is a polluter, but it's a very, very small polluter. And the industry is working incredibly hard to change that. 2% of all CO2 emissions worldwide are aviation, and that includes business aviation, airlines, and everything else.
But you're 2% of 2%.
And we're 2% of that 2%. Business aviation, correct. The whole of business aviation is 2% of that 2%. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, and the industry is working very, very hard to reduce that. So, our aircraft is the PC-12 is the most efficient. The turboprops are much more efficient. If you think about it, you have a larger propeller that's pushing air.
Right.
So that's more efficient than a jet, which is pushing a smaller volume of air. So you have more inefficiency with a jet, and that's also incidentally why you see jet engines getting bigger and bigger these days. The fans are getting bigger because they're more efficient, more fuel efficient. But the ultimate efficient power plant really is a turboprop with a large propeller. So our PC-12 is by far the greenest aircraft. It has one power plant, one propeller. So the industry is trying to make to make aviation more efficient, to make it more sustainable. We have sustainable aviation fuel now, for example, as well, which is fuel that's sustainably sourced. We're working very hard to try to eliminate emissions altogether with electric aircraft, but that's still some way off. I believe.
So more than most, you're going to tell us what's going to happen there. This surely is just going to be an incredible technological advancement, is the idea of flying fully electric. Is it even possible?
It is possible, and it's already, I think it's about a $3 or $4 billion market already worldwide. So electric aviation airplanes are already flying. And they're mostly used as training aircraft because you haven't got the range. That's the problem. So you can take off, you can fly circuits with them, you can practice takeoffs and landings, but you really don't have the range to fly cross country. And of course, the type of customer that we're talking about typically wants to fly longer distances and wants to get from A to B, and that aircraft just isn't suitable, unfortunately, yet. So I think with the advancements of hydrogen in a few years to come, that will really improve things. The biggest challenge there, of course, is storage. But I've also personally invested in electric aviation startup company.
Oh, wow.
So the Skyfly Axe, which is a British company. Very, very simple design of aircraft, no moving parts particularly, so it can both take off and land vertically, but it also has conventional wings, so it can also take off and land conventionally as well as a normal aircraft. And it's appealing to an existing microlight customer. So microlight customers typically only fly short hops, so it's ideally suited to that market. So there's no need to find an additional market, to sell it to a new market, to have additional ground infrastructure to support the operation of this aircraft. It's just a very simple aeroplane that can fly. The other advantage of that is it's below a certain regulatory threshold, which allows the manufacturer of the aircraft to be a little bit more innovative and experimental. So it's still regulated and still very safe to operate, but there's it's a little bit less restricted than a typical light aircraft, for example, and that allows more innovation. And once there's proof of concept, you can then scale that into larger aircraft.
Incredible. So you're putting your money where your mouth is.
I am, yes.
In this area.
Yeah. I think it's still, just to clarify, it's still a little bit too risky for our business.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I love about Tecnam, for example, so the other OEM that we work with, is they're incredibly innovative. Every time you go to Tecnam, there's a buzz, and I just get so energized when I go there. And there are multiple different products. They're all traditionally powered, but they were looking for one of their conventional aircraft with traditionally powered engines to power them with electric engines. But that didn't quite work. They were a little bit delayed with that. I think that's primarily because of battery technology. So they haven't given up. They're still very much looking at it. But that, for example, for the business, de-risks what I'm doing. So I can actually look at electric aviation without risking my capital with the startup. So I did that personally, but not with the business.
Do you think flying taxis, that sort of thing, will be a reality in our lifetime?
In our lifetime? That's an interesting question. I think electric aircraft already are a reality. So that's already here.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are concerned by how a flying taxi is going to work. How's the infrastructure going to support it? I don't see that as a big problem. I think helicopters are already flying. If you go to places like Sao Paulo or Mexico City, helicopters are very commonplace, and that's how people get around because the traffic's so difficult. So there already are heli lanes, and people are very used to flying helicopters on those short hop routes within cities. So if you think of that, I don't see any reason why you couldn't have air taxis doing the same thing with an electric aircraft. I think the hurdle that we have to overcome is the perception of safety. We all want greener aircraft. We all want more sustainable aircraft, but we also want safe aircraft. And that's the big question, of course, is safety. So I think there has to be proof of concept first, as I mentioned before, with some of the smaller aircraft before we can scale up to some of the larger aircraft. But the technology is certainly very doable. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing, I think, Amazon deliveries being done with drones. So there's a different safety implication, of course, delivering cargo versus delivering people. But I think that will evolve. So I think it's possible. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's very positive, and I certainly hope so. It scares me somewhat less than driverless cars for some reason.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why, but
I was going to ask you that actually. I mean, it's we've seen advances in aviation throughout the whole of history. I mean, in probably 40, 50 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamt of flying across the Atlantic. Anything less than 3 engines would be the minimum. Yeah, and of course now we don't think twice about flying the Atlantic with a 2-engine aircraft. So I think it's just technology advances and people get more comfortable with the technology as it progresses and advances. So yeah.
The other one is I'm interested in is supersonic travel, and Concorde's fascinating. Obviously, people are attracted to the glamour and that side of it, but it's also one of those rare examples of a technological innovation that happened in the past that seems not to have been replicated, as well as a collaboration between the French and the English, right, which is equally surprising. Yeah. But do you think we'll see that quite soon? Getting to Sydney in 6 hours, New York in 3 hours again.
I think the question is funding. I mean, the technology is obviously available. It's funding and also the market clearly as well. Is the right buyer there? There are companies that have looked at it. So business aviation companies, not so much airline, but more for a business aviation type of supersonic aircraft. And I think that's always been the stumbling block, has been the funding. And the aircraft itself will be very, very expensive to purchase. The acquisition cost, the build cost of the airplane will be very high. The operating cost will also be very high as well. So it's really whether there's a market, whether people would place enough value on time to be able to make that transatlantic crossing sooner. The technology is there. I think it's very much an economic question, whether the market would support it.
Yeah, fair enough. Back to your business. You're based in Biggin Hill in Kent, very famous old airfield. Where do you go from here? What are the growth opportunities as you see it? Do you go outside of the UK? Can you go into other aircraft or other service lines?
We'll definitely go outside the UK. In fact, we already are to some extent because we're in Ireland. Ireland's part of our territory, which is, I mentioned that UK has its own regulatory environment, and so does Europe. Well, Ireland falls under Europe. So we already are operating in Europe. So the flight operations for our business is relatively new. We started that 2 or 3 years ago, full operation. So and once we've got that established, then of course we will also be looking at doing something with a European AOC as well. So that would very much be the next step, to set up a European AOC and to be able to support our customers in Ireland, and also look at expanding into Europe. And I'm very keen to diversify the business. So we're delighted with the partnership with Pilatus, with Tecnam, with Cirrus, but it's important that we continue to diversify the business in a way that feeds the rest of the business. And that's what aviation is very much about, is building complementary businesses that feed into each other and that allows the business to scale that way. And in terms of future opportunities, I'm certainly looking at other innovative OEMs. So I think now that we have a stable base with what we have, I can afford to take more risk. As I mentioned before, I was a bit risk averse with going into electric aviation, with the exception of working with Tecnam, who I see as a very stable partner. But that's why for me it was too risky to invest company money in electric aviation startup, and I invested my own. But I think now that we have a stable platform, I think now we can afford to take more risk and to look at other opportunities and maybe get some first mover advantage working with some other OEMs. And there are a lot of exciting OEMs that are looking to develop hybrid aircraft, electric aircraft, maybe hydrogen aircraft in the future. And we can support them through maintenance. That's something that we could do that's very obvious. We have a very good maintenance capability in-house. So taking something that we're already very good at, all flight operations, is another example. Then working with that OEM, building mutual trust both ways. So we can learn about them, they can learn about us, and then eventually maybe committing to actually purchasing their aircraft as well to sell the same sort of model. It's something that we're very interested in doing. And we do also see other opportunities in other parts of the world. I think, just before I go on to other parts of the world, I think we're at a very exciting time in aviation now, because I think the drive to be more sustainable is very exciting. And I think there's more funding that can go into that now than there ever has been before, because of this need to be more sustainable. And I also see huge growth opportunity in Asia. So traditional aviation, what we do very well here in Europe and in the US, I believe we can also expand to Asia and to other markets. And the Middle East is also growing very rapidly. And we're seeing a lot of sales of aircraft in India, Southeast Asia especially. So those are interesting growth areas.
That's interesting, because superficially, I think those continents or those regions involve long distances, even between cities.
They do, yeah.
But I suppose there's always a market for more regional, intra-regional travel.
Sure, yeah.
Well,
I guess if you look at the US is a sort of a good case study.
Yeah.
So you have the the eastern seaboard, if you like, which is very much like Europe demographically. So you have a lot more concentration of population and demographics. You have more airports and also better connectivity as well. You have better rail connectivity, better road connectivity.
Yeah.
But then you have some of the more sparsely populated regions of the US that have the airport infrastructure and the aviation infrastructure, but that lack the rest of it. And that's where aeroplanes sell particularly well in those parts of the world. And it'll be the same. We're very fortunate that we at the moment have different types of aviation products. So from the very short haul products to the longer range products, and so we can work with it. We can bring that concept to those markets, those new markets as well. I think you'll have everything there. But I think that at the moment the infrastructure isn't quite as well developed as it is in Europe and US. Yeah, that's coming, and that's an opportunity maybe for us as well.
Sure. No. We're interested in this podcast as well on in businesses like yours. There's a fascinating contrast between the front end of the business, where you're dealing in selling or relationships with very high value customers, and the shop floor, so to speak, where there's a lot of process technical expertise. It's very, very different. How do you keep those together fluidly in your business? Is that where maybe the retail background comes in? Were there some learnings there?
I think that the retail background for me taught me a lot about leadership and about people. Right. Retail is very much a people business. If you're running a store or running a chain of stores, it's very much about leadership and about how you keep your staff motivated and engaged, and that learning definitely applies to aviation even more so. I think the contact with the customer, as we've hinted at before, aviation is very much a relationship business. So engineers And to a lesser extent, I'd say, mostly engineers, they tend to be very technical, very specialized in what they're doing, very focused on what they're doing, and they should be. That's their expertise. You then need to have a customer relationship person who can make that transition that you're talking about, that translation from technical to the customer. And then that also begs the question, who is the customer? Very often our customers are actually pilots. So our customer obviously is the person who buys the airplane, who actually spends the money on the aircraft. And they tend to be, not always, but sometimes less technical. We do have owner pilots who buy airplanes as well, but very often that the person who's buying the airplane buys it as a productivity tool. And for them, that they have less technical affinity, but of course the pilot has a lot of technical affinity, and that really works very well. So often the pilots can also speak with the technicians and engineers, and that interface is less complicated to manage.
Yeah. I'd love now just to go to you, some quick fire questions around you. So obviously you break all the rules about not making your passion your business, because you've definitely done that. You're a pilot in your free time. What's been the most incredible flight you've done as a pilot?
Oh my goodness! Well, I'm extremely fortunate that I fly the former Red Arrow fast jet. So without question, flying those aircraft is an incredible privilege. It requires a lot of discipline, a lot of training. You've really got to be on your A game as a pilot. But it's incredibly rewarding to fly those aircraft. I love flying. I love pure flying, and those aircraft are very pure.
You said it's a jet.
That's a military jet, so it's a swept-wing military jet.
Obviously, that's a different license from a propeller plane.
It is. Well, yes. There is. So for every complicated aircraft, you have training on that specific type of aircraft.
Yeah. Incredible.
So propeller aircraft, there's the single engine piston, the multi-engine piston. You can fly most of those types within that category with no differences training. Yeah. When you move on to jets or turboprops, you need specific training for each type that you fly.
Wow. And so that's so you can pull some incredible feats of aerobatics
very safely. Sort of exactly. I think the key, the key with air display flying, there's really no room for egos. You've got to do it very, very safely. You're there to display the airplane. It's not about the pilot. Yeah. So you're displaying a part of our aviation heritage, part of Britain's aviation heritage, and that's what the crowd want to see. They want to see it beautifully flown. They want to see the aircraft flown. They don't want to see anything that's dangerous or so it's just got to be very, very safe.
Yeah.
So we practice a lot, and we fly maneuvers that are actually very straightforward and easy to fly because we're flying at low level. But to the crowd, they might look, a loop or a roll or something like that might look very impressive to the crowd, but they're actually very simple maneuvers to fly.
Incredible. Your favorite plane, or is it that one? What's your...
I wouldn't say I have a favorite plane because it depends. Again, it goes back to what we said at the very beginning. I think it really depends on what the mission is. I personally love flying, so yes, I love the Gnat. The PC-12 that I fly is so versatile. So I wouldn't say the handling of the PC-12 compares with a fighter because it's a very different aircraft. It's built for a different mission. But the fact that I can land the PC-12 on a grass strip and just as comfortably slot in with all the airline traffic and Vienna Airport or a big international airport, I just love the versatility of the aircraft. It's just it's just so flexible. And then take my whole family and fly out of a farm strip that's perfect for a PA-18 or a Super Cub or something like that. So it's amazing.
Yeah. And your favorite random airfield anywhere in the world? Which one is it?
I honestly love Headcorn in the UK. It's got a wonderful atmosphere. I did a lot of my early flying at Headcorn. It's just a beautiful farm strip in the middle of Kent. I love Switzerland. I love flying in the Alps.
Wow.
So some of the airports there, breathtakingly beautiful.
As well as dangerous at times.
No, they're not. I think, no, if it's dangerous, you don't fly in there. It's very simple. So you just got to be very, very careful and always have an out, always have an exit. So, say, for example, if we do a demonstrate, we very often do demo flights to the factory where Pilatus aircraft are built. Yeah. And sometimes the weather conditions aren't suitable and is surrounded by airports. So we tell the customers, well, I'm sorry, but if we can't get there, we'll have to go to Zurich. And that's a real possibility. And that way you haven't boxed yourself into a corner. So you always have an out. You've already told the customer that you might have to go to Zurich. He's already aware, and that way you're never putting yourself in a box and cornering yourself. Yeah.
Now, we always ask the same 4 questions at the end of this podcast to everyone. I'm going to put you in the hot seat, if that's okay.
Of course.
The first question is, what would you most like to change about your industry?
I would like to, I think it really goes back to the regulatory environment. Right. I'd like to see more coordination of regulators across the world. Our particular class of aircraft is quite unique. We've only just had commercial operations of this aircraft for about 8 years now in Europe. The Americans have been doing it for 30.
Right.
Why are we trying to reinvent the wheel when the Americans have already done it? So I think regulation is a big one. Regulation is important for safety, but I think just a little bit more learning across borders and from other regulators that have already done it, and there's already proof of concept.
Yeah. Second question: what most concerns you about the world we're leaving the next generation?
I think a major concern that I have is what I love about flying is it puts you back in touch with nature. You're flying in the elements. I mean, the beauty of flying through the weather, through the clouds, it's so beautiful. And I'm concerned that we're losing that. I'm concerned that we're losing, through technology, through an over-reliance on devices, on iPads, on, children aren't going out and enjoying the outdoors as much as they were before. So it's those sort of things that concern me. I'm concerned that we're moving into a world that's in many ways more fake. There's a lot of deep fake. People will grow more distrustful of media and what they see and what, the information they consume. So it'll be growing distrust, I think just a lack of enjoying nature and the outdoors.
Yeah. If you had to give up your job and you're allowed to work in aviation, what would you do?
I would probably do something in the non-profit.
Okay.
I love entrepreneurship, but I think at some point in my life, it's too early now, but I'd love to. I mean, I'm hoping through my business I can give back as well, but I'd like to work in the non-profit and do something to try to give back and put something back into
Which
society.
area specifically?
I mean, I know aviation very well, and I've really worked in non-for-profits in aviation. So I work with Flying Scholarship for the Disabled, for example. So what that does is it uses aviation as a means to achieve an end. It's not about flying, but people with a disability and who lack confidence, once they've actually soloed an aircraft, it makes them realize just how much they can achieve. And many of those scholars, they went on to start businesses and to be entrepreneurs. Employers look at them with a completely different light. You've done what? You soloed an aircraft? It's using aviation as a means to achieve a bigger end.
Yeah.
That's something I'd love to get more involved with because I know the sector. So to be able to give back with it would be fantastic.
Great. And the last question is, for you, what's the most exciting thing coming up in the next 5 years?
Without question, growth of the business. I've already sort of said that I think there's so much exciting development happening in aviation, so much scope for innovation, the need to make the industry more sustainable, opportunities to expand in Asia, opportunities to do more entrepreneurial activity with innovative aviation products in Europe as well.
Brilliant. Well, that's a positive way to end in this challenging environment to find some businesses that are doing really well. Thank you very much, Edwin. That was,
it was a real
amazing to see a side of aviation I think people probably haven't thought about too much. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Likewise. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Luxe. You can find us on socials at Matter of Form, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLuxe. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterofform.com and chat to one of our consultants.